Hi everybody, I'm here with Dr. Tom Shippey today. Dr. Shippey has written a few books on J.R.R. Tolkien, and he is the world's foremost expert and scholar on Tolkien. He knew Tolkien towards the end of his life, and he was also involved in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. He's had a distinguished academic career in the United Kingdom and the United States. Dr. Shippey, thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, yeah.
Your work's had a great influence on a lot of people. How were you first introduced to J.R.R. Tolkien's books?
Well, I borrowed a copy of The Hobbit from my friend at school, David Powis, and read it and was very impressed, but was not able to read The Lord of the Rings for some time because it was too expensive and I couldn't afford a copy. And that was how I started.
Now, what prompted you to begin writing on Tolkien?
Well, it was affection for Tolkien. I thought he had been misrepresented by people who talked about him because they didn't know his background very well. And my background was curiously similar to Tolkien's. So I felt that I was a better judge of that than most people. And I just thought that somebody ought to set the record straight about Tolkien. So it was an example of what the Romans would call pietas, sort of veneration for the ancestors, right, so to speak.
Now, your first book on him was The Road to Middle-earth, right?
Right.
That came out in 1983?
No, 82 I think it was.
82. Now, when did you first meet Tolkien?
Oh, only really at the end of his life. I got a job at Oxford in 1972. I must have got there about September 72, and Tolkien of course died about 4 months later. But I guess I went to meet him quite soon after I arrived in Oxford. I was taken there by Tolkien's successor Norman Davis, who was the professor of Anglo-Saxon, and you know, just had a chat to him. But we had corresponded previously, and I think Tolkien was sort of aware of who I was because we were both old Edwardians, and you can see I'm wearing my old Edwardians Rugby Club Vice President's polo shirt.
What was he like in person? Was he?
He was a very amiable, cheerful old gent, and very interested, as hobbits are, in the kind of small business and the small dealings of the place he came from, which I think he missed. You know, he hadn't had anyone talk to him about Birmingham for some considerable time, and he was just interested to know how things had gone.
Right, yeah.
So he was cheerful, and we just gossiped. We didn't talk about anything serious. I thought he'd been interviewed too often, you know, and people were grilling him all the time, and I wasn't going to grill him.
Right. No. Right. Can you tell us a little bit, Dr. Shippey, about your academic career? Where did you teach?
Well, I started off as an assistant lecturer at the University of Birmingham, 65 to 72. Then I got a fellowship at St John's College, Oxford, 72 to 79. Then I got the chair of English Language and Medieval English Literature, previously held by Tolkien, and I was there 1979 to 1993. And then I went off to the Walter J. Ong Chair of Humanities at St. Louis University, and I was there from 93 to 2018. But in the intervals of my time at Leeds, I had a semester at Harvard in 1981, and an academic year at the University of Texas, Austin, 1987 to 88. So those are my 6 universities.
Right. That's amazing. So you published The Road to Middle-earth in 1982. Now, after the publication of that book, how did you begin to build your reputation as a Tolkien scholar?
Well, I didn't really. I made no attempt to do that because actually I had other fish to fry. Tolkien is not my central interest. It's a bit of a side issue in some ways. I'm a medievalist. That's what they pay me for. So actually, I did other things. I can't actually quite remember what the sequence was now, but I was certainly doing other things. Yeah, I made no attempt to build a reputation as a Tolkien scholar.
Now, your second book was J.R.R. Tolkien, Author of the Century, second book on Tolkien. What prompted you to write that book?
Well, if you study languages, there are 2 ways of doing it. There's historical, and there's contemporary. And I thought with Tolkien, I had done my best to set Tolkien historically in the tradition of philological scholarship, which dates back to Jacob Grimm. But author of the century, I thought, well, actually, it would be only right to look at Tolkien as a contemporary author and try to look at him sort of, you might say, not vertically, but horizontally. So I tried to set him rather more in the context of the literature of his time.
Now, did you receive any negative feedback about claiming him as the author of the 20th century?
Yeah. I mean, frankly, I was being provocative. I knew they wouldn't like it, and they didn't. And of course, actually, one thing I would say, being a philologist and therefore picky, I never said he was the author of the century. I just said author of the century, and people drew their own conclusions from that, usually wrong. No, they were. I got a lot of scornful and usually quite angry responses, which had no effect on me whatsoever.
Well, like you point out in the introduction to your book, the numbers tell everything.
Yeah.
The sales and the poll of the British readers who decided that it was the greatest book of the 20th century.
That's right.
So you were shown to be right. Now, Peter Jackson's two Middle-earth trilogies have brought Tolkien's works to millions of people around the world who maybe previously hadn't heard about him or weren't interested in him. Now, you had a part to play in the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, is that correct?
Yeah, but not much. What they wanted really was a pronunciation guide.
Okay.
And that's quite important, because Tolkien, of course, used different spelling systems for different languages. So, AI might be pronounced I, as in Gwaihir, or it might be pronounced A, as in Thane. It depends which language you're talking about. So I did a kind of video of how to pronounce the names. And they got them all right, with one exception. They would keep saying Smeagol for Gollum, and actually it's Smeagol. But apart from that, they stuck to my script pretty well.
Did you do any work on the Hobbit trilogy?
No.
Okay.
No. The only thing I did was, they have these backup DVDs, and I contributed to the Lord of the Rings backup DVD and the Hobbit backup DVD.
Right, the interviews.
Yeah.
Do you think Jackson's movies have helped or hurt Tolkien's legacy?
Oh, I think it's obvious really they've helped. It's true that a lot of people, well, the first time I saw the first Jackson movie, Lord of the Rings, which was in St. Louis, I was at a premiere, kind of invited audience, and I sat and watched this, and it's a long movie, and as it unrolled, I realized that the theatre had gone dead silent. There weren't people getting up and going to the restroom. There weren't people, rustling their sweetie papers. It had gone dead silent, and I thought, they're getting home, isn't it? But when it was all over, there were a lot of people very impressed, but there was a little group in the corner, and these were what you might call Tolkien purists,
Yep.
and they were all telling each other where there'd been deviations from the Tolkien book, and that kind of reaction has remained. There are people who feel that every change is sort of unlicensed and so on,
Right.
which I actually listened to Jackson's explanations, and although I could see a lot of changes, every time he explained the change, I thought, well, he's got a point.
Right. Yeah.
He's got a point. You can do things in a book, and you can't do it on the film,
Right.
and vice versa.
Like making Goldberry float in water.
Yeah,
parts.
lots of things actually. So I thought that it was a very well thought out exercise. So I'm sure it actually, well, I know it brought Tolkien another whole generation of readers. Somebody told me actually from Houghton Mifflin. He said, the sales of Lord of the Rings went up, 1,000% after the Jackson movies came out.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's your answer.
Yeah.
Now, you've traveled around the world to speak on Tolkien. Can you share some of the countries you visited?
Well, I don't know about around the world. I mean, obviously in the USA, I spoke all over the USA and Canada. And I visited a number of European countries, Norway, Germany, Netherlands, Spain, Italy. Can't remember any of the others, probably there were some.
What are some of the most frequent subjects you talk on related to Tolkien?
I don't think there is. I try to do a different thing every time. So I don't think I have a kind of repeat script which I use. It depends on, sometimes the conferences have a theme and I'll go along with that.
Wow, so Dr. Shippey, you've done so much work on Tolkien, and it's just been incredible the amount of the books and essays and articles and interviews you've done. And I know I and a lot of others are very grateful for the work you've done in bringing him to light in so many different ways. So thank you so much for joining us on the History Bites YouTube channel today. I have one more question before we close. Looking back on your career and your work on Tolkien, what do you want people to most remember about you?
Well, I think that one of the things that was sad about Tolkien's life was that his subject, comparative philology, was basically erased from the university curriculum in Britain and in the United States. And that, I think, was a grief to him. And it's a grief to me as well. I really hope that some of what I wrote has made people realize what the subject is and what a powerful source of inspiration it can be. That's the main thing I wanted to get across.
Well, thank you again for your time, Dr. Shippey.
Yeah.
Don't go just yet, everybody. It's time for the... Dr. Shippey, what is your favorite meal?
Well, I went to a boarding school in Scotland in my youth. I eat anything. I'm just happy to have something to eat. So I can't say I got a favorite meal.
What's your favorite movie?
Shawshank Redemption.
Favorite book?
Now that's much harder. That's much harder. I would suggest Jack Vance's Lyonesse trilogy, which consists of, now can I remember the names of them? You know, I don't think I can. It was Vance's Lyonesse trilogy. I've got it as a, you know, as a 3-volume book, but of course they did come out separately. The first was called Suldrun's Garden. The second has escaped me, and the third was called Maduk, the name of a female character. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the second one.
No, you're okay.
Oh no, it was called The Green Pearl.
Green Pearl.
That's right. Got it.
Who's your favorite person from history?
Well, I have deep respect for King Alfred, the 9th century King of Wessex. Right. I think actually some of his own words survive, and they show a very interesting personality, at once somewhat evasive, but at the right moment decisive. You know, you don't know quite where he's going, and then suddenly it's order. Everyone do what I say. That, I think, is leadership. Yeah.
And what is your favorite hobby?
For a long time, actually, I was a keen runner or jogger, but time has caught up with me, and I don't do that much anymore. But I enjoyed that very much for many years, and I think it was very good for me too. I think that's about, oh, actually I should have said, of course, ever since I was a teenager, I have been fascinated by science fiction, and I read it all the time.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay.
Comment below and tell me what your favorite book is by J.R.R. Tolkien. Please give this video a thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and ring the notification bell to stay up to date with all of my videos. And until next time, go learn your history.